recording, start streaming, minimize that. Let's see how this goes. And we're live. All right. I actually don't have the intro page.
All right. I do have the intro. This is episode 3 of the new High Level Games podcast, and is the third in our ongoing show focused on looking at various settings of various game lines. We have started with the Ravenloft setting for Dungeons & Dragons, and today we're going to tackle Gundarak and Dominia. You can find High Level Games on all of our media platforms and social media accounts, from our Facebook page, conveniently titled High Level Games, our Twitter account at HLG_corporate, our YouTube channel, also called High Level Games, and finally our Twitch channel, High_Level_Games, which you're probably at right now, or you're listening to us on our podcast. Thank you for doing either one of those. You can also find the Inclusive Gaming Network, which is a project that falls under the High Level Games domain. There's a better term that just is blanking, and I should be reading the thing that I've got in front of me. You can find that on Twitter at inclusive_games and facebook.com Inclusive Gaming Network. You can also check out our website, keepontheheathlands.com. Because I have this, I'm just going to keep babbling for another minute, and then I'm going to let Quinn talk. I will, trust me. We have a Patreon page wherein you can support the many blog creators that make stuff for highlevelgames.ca. If you haven't checked out our blog yet, you're missing out. It is one of the best parts of High Level Games. You can find our Patreon at patreon.com/highlevel. For only $1 a month, you can get access to our content free as we release it, as well as all kinds of other cool content. Check out the pledge levels. You can also find products like Beckett's Vampire Folio Omnibus on the Storyteller's Vault, and our products in the DM's Guild and Drive-Thru RPG, including our Snowhaven Jumpstart and Archons of Naiku Jumpstart for Savage Worlds. Check those out. Let us know what you think. Quinn, what are we talking about tonight?
Well, we're going to talk about Gundarak and I think it's Dominiani. Yeah, Dominiani, which are both defunct domains in Ravenloft. So that's really, really exciting. We're going to talk about domains that no longer exist. Well, one sort of exists, or sort of existed. I don't know.
You could pull them back out of the ether if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends on the time that you are playing in. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, very exciting stuff.
Yeah, so Dominia is the island ruled by Dr.
Yes.
Dominiani.
So there's some history there, right? So Dominiani is okay. Dominiani is the Dark Lord of that particular island that has moved out. Was it the Nocturnal Sea or is the Sea of Sorrows?
I think the Sea of Sorrows.
Right. So originally it was part of the domain of Gundarak, and what it was is that Dr. Dominiani was a alienist, an early psychiatrist who had and continues to have the best asylum in Ravenloft, and he has a public persona that is nearly saintly because he takes care of people using his family fortune that no one else can take care of. And let's be honest, living in Ravenloft, you're probably going to have higher rates of a lot of the insanities and madnesses that he tries to treat. Now, the only downside to this saintly creature is that he is evil AF in every possible way. So he was a subject of Duke Gundar and Gundarak, and what happened was, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, he had found an injured bride of Gundarak, of Duke Gundar. So Duke Gundar was a vampire, and he found an injured bride of Gundarak, Duke Gundar, blah, 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 And a bride of the vampire is a type of lesser vampire that's under the thrall of a greater vampire. Later on editions, after second edition, they started calling them companion vampires to recognize that the earlier language was quite gendered and not accurate for many of the stories. So what ended up happening is that he ended up pulling cerebral fluid from the injured creature and injecting it into his own spinal column, as one does. And this made him into a vampire, and Nosferatu specifically, I think. But up until third edition, he was considered what was called a cerebral vampire, which they don't give any mechanics for. They just tell you that he is a vampire that instead of drinking blood, he subsists on cerebral spinal fluid. Which, of course, has the side effect of driving his victims quite mad. What you end up seeing if you interact with him in his asylum is that the asylum's all walled in, and there's like a beautiful park out back. It's really well detailed, actually. There's a beautiful park and gazebos and, nice places to sit and hang out. And there's people moving around. And in some versions, he has a small staff that helps him manage the patients. But he's feeding on the patients, and they're not getting better.
As they would, because they couldn't get any better while he's feeding on them, right?
Right. Or he's capturing people, taking them there, feeding on them, and then they can't remember, who they are or where they're from. They just know they're being tortured, but they're mad, so you don't believe anything that they say. It is a very specific type of horror that's playing in this, and that's this fear of old school asylums. And frankly, old school asylums had a lot to be terrified of, even when they were doing what they were supposed to be doing for the time.
Yeah, so things like Bedlam Hospital, and I'm trying to think of American Horror Story Asylum. Those sorts of asylums, the very stereotypical horror asylum setting. That's sort of what we're talking about here in Dominia.
Yes. And I mean, it's a good opportunity to, if you want to bring him into your game. I should probably talk about why he moved. He was a lesser subject of Duke Gundar for many years, hundreds of years, I think. And then he eventually manipulated a group of adventurers into attacking Duke Gundar and killing Duke Gundar. And then he took over as the Dark Lord of Gundarak for about 4 years or something. It wasn't very long. And then the Grand Conjunction happened. Or no, wait. He lost the Dark Lordship, and then the Grand Conjunction happened, something in that way. And they moved his little asylum onto an island. And he's quite happy on his island. People literally show up on ships to drop their relatives lovingly off for him to care for them.
Lovingly.
And they pay him sometimes. Which is brilliant. Now, the thing is that there's references to him temporarily curing people using cerebral spinal fluid injections, which gives them periods of lucidity, but he's never been able to kind of keep it going for more than a few weeks.
Right.
But he can send a perfectly healthy relative back home, only to have her, the only place she gets better is with Dr. Dominiani.
Which means he's going to get them back and, of course, probably get more money and more fluid to subsist on as he needs, right?
Absolutely. It is interesting. I have this beautiful, if you're listening, you're not seeing this, but I have this beautiful Feast of Goblins. Oh, let me try that. Feast of Goblins, 2nd edition adventure. It is part of the Grand Conjunction series of adventures, and I played through it, or I've run it for people. It is a huge adventure for second edition. So it's 96 pages long, so about 3 times the size. So 32 pages was the average length of a second edition adventure, 3 times the size. And it is interesting because it's clear from reading this that they very much wanted to detail the land of Cartacus, which we'll do in a future episode. And so it acts as a source book. Before splat books and source books were a thing, it kind of acts in that realm for Ravenloft, and really details a bunch of people, has one of the most bizarre adventures I have ever tried to run. My goodness, a modern game designer looking at this would be just aghast at some of the things you're expected to do. But in it, part of the confrontation that happens between Duke Gundar and Dominia is that Harkin Lucas, who's the Dark Lord of Cartacus, has a daughter named Acreal. Man, this sounds like a soap opera when you start to do this out loud.
I was actually going to be like, there are so many things that maybe we need a timeline for here, because I am fairly like up on what you're talking about, and I'm a little lost.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in the end, he pretends to be in love with Acreal, tries to turn Acreal against her father to take over as Dark Lord of the neighboring kingdom. And in the adventure, the adventurers go from Cartacus into Gundarak to deal with him and have an interaction. Now, in the adventure, his asylum has a full dungeon crawl style, room by room description that is quite cool. And it's very interesting. There's all kinds of neat stuff in there. There's a plot with him, and that being said, one of the downsides of this adventure is he looks and acts kind of like a human or werewolf that might be in human form. So most reviews say, hey, my players just attacked him and tried to kill him as soon as they met him.
Which sounds likely.
Yeah, but this is who he is.
Huh. So this Dr. Dominiani, also Dr. Cloud Heinfroth?
Yeah, Cloud Heinfroth is the alter ego he plays or played to some public members, and this is who he was pretending to be to Acreal during this time period.
Got it. So there's some... It's one of the things with this Dominia concept is it sounds like it's mentally difficult, both from an outside and an inside perspective, from all of the different like layers to it.
I think so. I mean, I think there's ways to bring this in. It's interesting because it's a very Renaissance or late Renaissance level technology pocket. And if you're playing in a previous time era where it's still in Gundarak, Gundarak certainly isn't in that time period, and it's this just weird pocket out of nowhere.
Aren't alienists like the concept of those in our real history from like the late 1800s? There was like a bit of a movement before Sigmund Freud, who is like modern psychology, but the alienist movement was 1860s at the earliest, I think.
Sort of about a century before Freud, and the beginning of kind of the modern philosophical or the modern psychological movement. That really came out of the philosophy of epistemology for about a century before that. But there were philosopher practitioners and medical practitioners that tried to work with the insane, to use that term of time, for centuries before that, and many of them were called alienists later on. But they do represent a longer thing.
Tradition of mental medical health
yes.
support.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, and also on some level, like taking on some like clergy elements, because I know some clergy were involved in some of those early things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in our real world, there really was, in Europe anyways, there really was no learning outside of the church. So most of your medical practitioners, philosophers, or whatever were also church people.
Yeah, which makes sense. But it does, I think, point out like this is the domain is strangely set time frame wise.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it's a like you're saying, late Renaissance. Gundarak is not. Gundarak's a very fantasy era. Like, it is a little bit more classic D&D-ish in setting, and yet also kind of pulling in like some of those late Victorian era elements into the setting as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, if you're playing this, if you're wanting to use this in your campaign in the modern setting, going to the island or having a dear friend succumb to some kind of mental illness, keeping in mind, if that's cool at your table.
Right.
Right? Because it is very much a trope in Gothic horror. Madness is very much a trope. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to make light of mental illness in any way. You want to handle it in a way that your table is going to be okay with.
Right.
So within that, you can have a family member who is going mad, or a loved one, or trusted NPC, or whatever. Even a player character, should the player character want to explore that, and have them taken to this asylum for help. And your player characters will believe the same thing that everybody else believes, which is Dominiani is a saint. Right? He's the only person that can help, and he's doing it out of the goodness of his heart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if you don't have money, don't worry about it. You know what? I'll do this for you.
Yeah, which anyone even slightly familiar with Ravenloft should immediately, alarm bells should be going off.
You're darn right.
Bing, 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 bing. No one.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, how would you play with this, with the kind of the concept of an asylum in a campaign? How would you approach it?
I honestly think this would be a hard, in some ways, a hard place for me to bring in, but in some other ways, I see it dovetails really well with the concepts of the setting itself. So I'm a werewolf person, obviously, right? I do Werewolf the podcast for folks that don't know that.
Josh is a werewolf.
Yes.
You heard it here.
No, I am a werecat, if anything, or a werecorax. Anyway, let's not get into that. Quinn, let's not get into that. Anyway, so what I would do is I would actually steal an idea from that. There's a storyline where there are werewolves that have had severe mental breakdowns from the lives that they live. And I would use this as a similar sort of story hook, in that players come here to get information from a key NPC that is locked in the asylum.
Oh, I like that.
And they know something about whatever it is. And of course, Dr. Dominiani is like, oh, you can meet with the patient. I have some regulations on how you interact with them because, they have had some severe episodes recently, and he clearly is controlling the entire access of information and trying to figure out what it is that this figure knows that you want from them. And of course, then he's stalking the players and stealing essence from them, perhaps in the middle of the night, and they're waking up without having rested, have it interrupt their long rest if you're using 5th edition or whatever it is.
And I would have them lose points temporarily of wisdom or intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd probably be most interested in the most intelligent or most wise characters among them.
Yep. That would be the way that I would link this location into a greater story, because I think that could be easily well done, and then it drags all the rest of the setting elements into it and lets you explore those and explore these themes.
I do like that, and I think you could make it come alive with having the person you're trying to contact and or others trying to warn you or ask for help, but being too ill to make much sense. And you need to, however, I think, lean hard into portraying Dominiani as a little eccentric, maybe, but a saint.
Mm-hmm.
right? Just the best person. Now, one of the interesting things about Dominiani is he's immune to garlic and quite likes it. And so one of the first things that you should do is have him make a meal for everybody and have him just eat cloves of garlic in front of them.
Right.
Right? Because that immediately throws people off. Oh, not a vampire.
Right.
Right? And I leaned hard into that, and my group was one of the few that didn't just immediately attack him because it was creepy. But I just portrayed him as an absolute saint. He just could. There's nothing he could do that wasn't helpful, and he always was quick to have an excuse of why he was away on business during the day or any of these things, and and just really, really wanted to help. So I would definitely lean into that, and I think there's room for. I don't know what it's called. It's kind of like a pity horror or something where a person is clearly being tormented and they're asking
Mm-hmm.
for help, but in a way that makes you feel powerless or places a moral quandary on the players, right? Do you believe this person who's clearly saying they come at night and drink fluid from, or they come at night and attack me, but also maybe does have actual delusions and trying
Right.
to suss those things out. I think that would be very interesting to play with your characters.
Definitely. Particularly if you are limited to the amount of time that you can interact with that individual. Like that time that you spend with them is really controlled, as it would be in an asylum setting. And so it's not odd for Dr. Dominiani or one of his staff to step in like, oh, they're getting too out of control. Like, we need to take them and calm them down, and we'll let you talk to them again tomorrow. It lets you layer in all of these different interactions, and maybe you interact with some other people. But of course, when you get folks that have things like schizophrenia, I'm not saying that as the only mental health issue that this is similar, but passing like elements of paranoia to one another is a common issue that is seen in these types of mental health institutions. So having someone else tell you the same thing may set off some worry bells because you know where you are. You're in Ravenloft as a player, but you're right. Like, there's some elements there where you're like, I can't trust these people because clearly they're not connected with the character's at least understanding of reality any longer and how you work through that.
I mean, I think if you do it really well, or if your players, if you're really lucky with your players or whatever, the best thing to happen is what happened with my group is that they left thinking Dominiani was a great guy, only to discover the truth when they were in the next kingdom over.
Right.
And then they were like, oh shit, we just left all those people there.
Did they go back?
Yeah, first thing I did, as soon as they found that out, I immediately had them all do a Dark Powers check.
Sure.
Because they all just participated, knowingly or not, the Dark Powers don't care, in an evil act of letting innocents suffer under the hands of an evil predator. And so immediately they were just like, oh, damn. And then they went back and threw down hard with him, which was a lot of fun.
That sounds cool. So the only other thing that I would change is I would do some adjustments to his vampiricness, because one of the things that I would want to do with him is have this vampirism not be a complete mirror of traditional vampirism.
Mm-hmm.
I would allow him to be up during the day. I would have him be completely immune to all the sorts of like classic vampiric things, like garlic, which I think is, that's already a good thing that he's immune to it, so you can play on that. But running water or whatever the things are that are in the setting for some vampires that bother them would not bother this particular figure. And I would probably pull on other things like rice. If something got spilled, he's the type of vampire maybe that has to lean down and count whatever it is that gets dropped in front of him. And he can easily be like, oh, yeah, I'm just picking up the things that are spilled here because we got to keep a clean facility. We don't want anyone to get hurt. Those are the types of things that I would pull in. I would pull in alternative vampiric things to really like push players off the chase, as it were.
Yeah, I think Van Richten's Guide to Vampires in 2nd edition was a great place to start because each type of vampires has different foibles, and he is a Nosferatu in later versions. I do like that. I think I would do a grab bag. Half of the normal things do affect him and half don't because he has such a unique origin story. You can explain it away with that. And but you do want, some clues there, right? Because when the discovery happens, you want the players to be like, damn it, I knew it!
Right. But also, like, continually push them off the chase.
Oh, absolutely. He's an expert. He's very charismatic. He's incredibly intelligent. And you should play him like that.
Now I want to, like, start using like motivational interviewing as this character with my players and have him just like push them away using that and be like, oh, anyway, we won't dive too far.
I definitely did a short session with one of my players who was having nightmares, and he was like, you're having nightmares? That's really, do you mind if you tell me about them? And he started to explain them, and he pulled out a notepad and started sketching them down, and he was just like, this is probably nothing, but if you'd like to talk more about this, I can offer you a few books, one of which I've written myself, and you can just have them, and knowing how expensive books are, this is an enormous gift, and if they offer to pay for those books, he said, you know what, no, here's what you do, whatever money you were going to pay me for that gift, pay it forward. Give it to someone else that needs it. I'm just here to help. And really, I sat down and had like a half an hour session with one of my players during a session where he really worked through their dreams and talked about how it was bothering him, what kind of the sources might be, and just being like, I'm here to help. I'm here to listen, whatever you need.
That is definitely like horrific.
Yes,
like,
that person, I will say I trust my players and I knew what I was doing with my players. That person felt violated. Not that person.
The player or the character?
That character felt violated. That character felt violated insofar as the character felt like he'd opened up to someone that he didn't think anyone could help him with, and then he saw this piece of hope, a friendly ear. And of the characters, not the player, of the characters, he was the most angry when he got back. And he made tactical decisions in combat that showed his anger.
Yeah.
That was very unlike that character who had most of the time was sit in the back, think things through, be cautious, protect myself. And he was all about offense. Which I thought was a fantastic thing to happen.
Definitely. One of those things, and we have talked about this in previous episodes and reiterate this, and you mentioned this before, but make sure your players know what type of games you're running. Build in safety mechanics and ways for comfort level and balance to happen. And then when you have that sort of safety and that understanding with one another and you're able to dive into these dark elements with each other, it can reflect back to you some really amazing role-playing, which helps both the players and allows for some interesting story moving forward. But safety comes first in this situation.
That's so important, especially when dealing with horror. Right? Because part of the horror is trying to push on these buttons that are fears and anxieties. The Gothic horror movement functionally is early sci-fi. And sci-fi traditionally has had a horror element attached to it. And it is about exploring our anxieties about whatever's going on in life at that time. And so some of the anxieties that are explored in Gothic horror are universal anxieties.
Right.
Right? And so they can still be very prevalent and personal to people.
Absolutely. So Dominia is now my favorite place that I will be using in a game at some point. But Gundarak, we are talking about these two domains this evening. Dominia, I think we've talked that to death. And now, tell us a little bit about Gundarak and why it no longer exists in the way that it used to.
So Gundarak was a large kingdom or duchy, I guess, on the southwestern border of Barovia in the early part of the timeline. And Duke Gundar was a long-established warlord vampire. Now, you can already see why they wrote him out of the history, because we already have Strahd.
Right.
Now, it is interesting because Gundarak was so short-lived in regards to how long it was around. It never gets, I think, the detail that it kind of deserved in early editions. And so what we do know is that Duke Gundar was a warlord of some kind that became a vampire, and he rules over this duchy. And his ancestors had put down a series of rebellions in the previous age, the first, second, and third unwise rebellions, each of which were like nobles coming up against his tyrannical predecessors. And each one were, of course, heroically put down by him or his predecessors. Or I guess all of them were his predecessors. And the third one, they murdered every noble family that wasn't related through marriage or blood to the Gundarak family, or to the Gundars.
Right.
And so the domain that exists in Ravenloft is a tyrannical domain ruled by Duke Gundar and his son, and it has a group of nobles around him that are somewhat impoverished nobles and just extensions of his being as the temporal leader and Dark Lord of this realm. And they're all his relations. And they're kind of very inbred in their dealings. Not everybody is related one-on-one, but every noble family is somehow related to every other noble family. They don't marry outside because that's illegal. And so they kind of keep marrying, and so the web of alliances and marriages and blood relations is thick and deep and goes back a few generations. And they own and control everything.
Right. Now, I want to add one little tidbit that I find fascinating about Duke Gundar and Gundarak, and is that he resides in Castle Hunadora, which is the name is based on Hunadora Castle in Transylvania. So even more these are references to the Dracula myth. This is not Bram Stoker's Dracula's castle, but it's another major castle that influenced that story. And in the White Wolf vampire canon is a major location for a whole sect of vampires called the Inkanu, who are stuck there with a demon, but that's another story. But I think it's interesting, when you're talking about the overlaps between Strahd and this character, there's so much similar to them and so much overlap to the Transylvanian vampire mythos that, while I think this is a lot of fascinating potential, what's the word I want to use, political stuff as well, it seems on the surface so close to Strahd that it's almost inevitable that this would be pushed out at some point.
It very much feels first of all, in canon, Strahd and Duke Gundar hate each other.
Right.
Just despise each other.
Right.
But and theoretically, Duke Gundar is more powerful personally than Strahd is, right? Vampire to vampire, though they can never meet because neither of them can leave their domains. But the interesting thing is from a design or writing standpoint, it feels to me, if I had to do a dissection of this or critical dissection of this work, it feels to me like one of the designers on the original black box, or was it the original red box? The original box setting had his own Dracula takeaway and inserted it. Even though Strahd was there, he kind of inserted it into the realm. But it became very apparent to every other designer and writer for this setting that this person was superfluous. Right? We didn't need this person at all, and so the first chance they got, they wrote him out of the setting.
Right. Which, on some level, makes a lot of sense, but in another level is a little sad because there's a lot of neat linkages that this character has to other elements of the setting. Particularly if you read the Night of the Black Rose novel, his connections with Lord Soth, and that whole realm. This is a character that could be really interesting. I would just move them. I would move Gundarak away from Strahd's domain. Yeah. I would move it away from Barovia just so that tension wasn't there.
And I think when we talked about Barovia, we talked about Barovia and Strahd is a take on like the movie version of Dracula. Right. The early classic monster movie version, the Bela Lugosi Dracula. This Dracula is the novel Dracula. It's far closer.
Bits and pieces of like historical Vlad Tepes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And you can see that in some of the reference material around the denizens of his domain. Right? The denizens of his domain, if you read the Gazetteer Volume 1, what happens is as the Grand Conjunction happens, Gundar is dead, Dominiani moves, and Gundarak is absorbed by Invidia and Barovia, so a big chunk of what used to be Gundarak is now in Barovia. And what you see is the Gundarakites are very much this kind of Hungarian, Balkan, medieval trope, right? And so they're going to wear blues and greens and yellows. They're going to wear sheepskin vests, probably use big axes or scimitars. This is, in our real world, this is a culture that's influenced by the confluence between Orthodox Christianity and Islam and the various influences that happen in that realm between the Holy Roman Empire and the Ottomans during this period. And their culture reflects some of those influences going both ways. So you wouldn't be out of trope to see a point on top of somebody's helmet, right, or those sorts of things. Mountainous terrain. They're also going to have a Greek flavor to a lot of the names that are used. So a lot of Piotr's and Mikhals and things of this nature.
So this is potentially the Constantinople or the edges of the Ottoman Empire, which smack right up against Transylvania, making sense for those connections, with that Vlad Tepes actually having, and Wallachia having fought against the Ottoman incursion.
Yes.
It all fits.
Yeah, I actually went to a Facebook group that was about Ravenloft, and I asked, and originally I started thinking, like, what is the cultural takeaway for them? And originally I was like, it seems East German or very Slavic in some way, but it wasn't, everything I said wasn't quite right. And then I did more research, and I really came down on this is supposed to be Wallachia, right? Is this supposed to be real Transylvania in its inspiration, anyways? And so I think that sticking to that will give it a different flavor. If you cross the border from Barovia into Gundar, you do want a culture shift, and so you don't want to be too similar. So first of all, they're going to be much more colorful in their dress. Everyone in Barovia dresses in black, basically.
Right.
And so they're going to be much more colorful in dress. The sheepskin clothing, soldiery is going to be bands of people on horseback with big axes or scimitars or cutlasses that can use from horseback. You're not going to see impaling. That's somebody else's stuff. But you're going to see the big old creepy castles that are run down by an impoverished nobility that can't afford to keep it up. But it kind of looks like this place has seen better times.
Mm-hmm.
And the people are in serfdom and they are in extreme poverty. I do want to point out that this is a ostensibly incredibly misogynistic realm. And that's also something you want to think about with your players, because one of the core evils that Duke Gundar visits upon his people is an incredibly excessive taxation that taxes them into excessive poverty. And one of the taxes is a massive head tax on every female child that is born. And if the female child, if you can't pay the price, they take your kid. And this,
Yeesh.
yes, so it's horrifying. And so Duke Gundar does have a whole group of these stolen children that he's turned into his companions, his vampiric companions. And there's, you probably would see, people dressing. Something you might happen upon in the street is realizing that someone is dressing as a male, but is very clearly female, trying to fool the local constabulary. That sort of thing a reveal could be interesting. But it is sick, right? It's a real. I think that the things that freak me out most when I come across them in Ravenloft, the things that don't make me go, "Oh, this is so cool," but actually bother me, are the things that could exist in real life.
Yeah.
Right? Vampires and carrying your lover across a mountaintop while the lightning flashes. That's neat. I like that. This could exist, and it bothers me, right? It messes with me a little bit.
Yeah. I think with those elements, I'm never comfortable. I'm never, like, particularly with children, that's a line for me, but it's always a line where I'm like, I'm generally not going to cross it. That type of, like, misogyny in the right game, and with the right player comfort level, we might address it as a way of stopping it. But I would be very careful about how I brought those sorts of elements in, just because it often isn't fun for people to have those sorts of things that are happening potentially in our real world that are frustrating and that are damaging, and then have them in the game can break people from the positive enjoyment elements of the story.
Yeah, specifically if you're having people playing female characters or women in the game as characters. In canon, they're going to be treated poorly, right? And I mean, if your group is comfortable exploring that, there are ways you can bring that to life. But it is something you want to keep in mind. People need to be uncomfortable, because if you have a female leader of your group, and that person steps forward to speak with the patrol, they're just going to ride right past her and speak to the nearest dude. And that, if people aren't expecting that, that can just be infuriating and damaging, and you don't want to do that. So, but if people are open to exploring that, it can also be a powerful moment. So it's interesting. I mean, when I played them, I've only played characters in this for the Adventure Feast of Goblins for 2nd edition that I ran using the 3.5 rules. When I did this, I play on some of these tropes, but basically they're just traveling to Dominiani and traveling back, then traveling to Dominiani to kill him and traveling back. So when I had them run into the patrols, they just extracted massive taxes from them and made sure that they were carrying papers. They demanded papers, and no one knew what papers they're talking about, and so they made them buy the papers and then tax them for the papers. And the taxes were ridiculous, and they would tax everything. There's a sword tax if you want to walk around armed. There is a tax for every head, dependent on the sex of the people or the gender of the people. There's a tax for every animal that you have with them. There's a tax for, just anything you can think of to make it as oppressive as possible. But if you pay enough money, they'll probably let you buy.
Right.
But the next group that comes in, those papers that you have, all it shows is that you paid the previous person, and they'll tax you again anyways for new taxes because you paid the old taxes. But they'll come up with something new.
Oh,
this is a road toll. This is a whatever it is. But more and more and more taxes. They're just going to tax you to death while you're there. If you buy anything in town, there's going to be a tax. You could be sitting there having an ale at an inn in Teufeldorf, and the soldiery would just come in and just start going table to table and demanding tax.
Wow.
Right? There is a huge aura of oppression through taxation in this set or in this domain, and if you want to play to the source material, that's where you want to lean into.
So Feast of Goblins is part of the Grand Conjunction storyline, right? Am I right about that?
It is.
Yeah. Which is why it fit into that campaign, because you were running through all of the elements of the Grand Conjunction.
Yeah, we played through the entirety of the Grand Conjunction, except for the last 10 pages of the last episode, the last adventure, and then the campaign. People started having babies and stuff, so we've 4.5 years just to not finish it.
that is the worst. You're right at the end.
Exactly. I was like, if we could just meet one more time for 8 hours or something, and we could be done.
Yeah. That stinks.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling with Gundarak to figure out what I would do here as a DM that I couldn't do in another realm. There's things here that I think are interesting, but it's not enough for me to pull Gundarak in.
Now, here's what I would provide you. This is my take. If you update the timeline to post-Duke Gundar's death, and Barovia and Nvidia have taken over portions of it, the Gundarakites and are now an ethnic minority within Barovia. And there are themes of nationalism and rebellion and things of this nature. So allies who might have been descended from crappy people when Gundarak was a thing, or might be the crappy people when Gundarak was a thing, also don't like being told what to do by a Barovian. And so there is ways to play them as an ethnic minority. There is a specific religion that they follow that Duke Gundar was really big on. It was called
the Cult of Erlin.
Yes. Yes. So and this is a death cult, but it's about there's a message of hope. The Morning Lord is a religion that's taken off amongst the Gundarakites because they, need some hope.
Oh, hope, yeah.
But as a ethnic minority within Barovia, if you're engaged in a back and forth with Strahd, I think this is a good, rich source material to mine to find allies, even if they're shady allies, within the county of Barovia.
I like that. So, what would be good is to add them in as a third settlement if I was running this in 5e and I'm running the Curse of Strahd module, then I would put this in the southwest of the Barovian map, and like almost find the road here by accident and find these people that are willing to rebel. They're terrible people. I would lean into that. But these terrible people that are willing to rebel against Strahd and have enough numbers to actually enact a rebellion that will, in theory at least, bother him, if not topple his regime. That would be a way, I think, to bring this in that could be morally challenging for players in a good way.
Yeah, and I mean, if you bring Teufeldorf to life, Teufeldorf has a population of 3,500, which makes it makes the Gundarakites somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40% of the population of Barovia.
Right.
Right, and so they are taxed less rigorously under Strahd, but they're conquered by a foreign ruler from their perspective, the Devil Strahd. And they have numbers, right? Now, Teufeldorf is ruled by a military captain, not by a boyar or a burgomeister. And so you can play with the fact that they're oppressed and controlled. And, I might institute I don't know if you have to institute a curfew in Barovia. Everyone just goes in and locks the door anyways. But,
right.
but I don't know. I would do something. I would have roving groups of soldiers and just play with. There's a different character to the relationship with the people here, right? Everywhere else, Strahd, they're Strahd's people, right? Here, they're not as much Strahd's people. He's still the land. He still is the ancient. But I think that's where I would play with it. I agree with you. Gundarak doesn't interest me terribly much as a place to play in Ravenloft. I think if I found Gundarak in a regular fantasy setting, it would be exciting for me.
Yep, agreed.
But in Ravenloft, there's not much there that I'm really excited about, except for Dominia himself.
Right, which that element is absolutely. I'm glad we started with that because that's, I think, exciting. In the this could be explored really well at a table.
Yeah,
but yeah.
I mean, in the campaign that I ran through, Gundarak felt like just an annoying or dangerous land to get through to get where you were actually going.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, maybe that's what it is. If you're playing in an earlier timeline or Gundarak is a thing, if you want to get to the asylum, you have to go through Gundarak.
Mm.
Maybe that's what it is.
Maybe. I just feel like players are going to get annoyed with that and not engage in it, which, I
agree.
I want my players to engage to some degree in whatever plot I'm putting them in and make choices that matter. Yep,
I agree. I really think I would love to talk to, let's see, Blake Mobley, who wrote the Feast of Goblins, and maybe whoever put, various writers on the original Ravenloft box sets and stuff, and just ask them, what did you think? Or who's the author of Night of the Black Rose, maybe?
Oh, that is a good question, and I should know that off the top of my head.
But maybe talk to them and say, what was your take on it? Because they sat with and created in and designed for Gundarak. So I don't know. I don't know what you'd do with there.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry, I'm trying to find who wrote the freaking book. Lisa Smedman?
Oh.
Doesn't sound right, but maybe.
So, yeah, I would love to talk to that person and ask them, you sat with this, you had Gundar as a character in one of your novels, you had a significant portion of that novel takes place in Gundarak.
James Lowder was the one that wrote Night of the Black Rose.
James Lowder, okay.
Yeah.
And what was going on there?
Yeah.
Because I will agree, my players didn't really engage with Gundarak because they were going through it to get to where they were actually going.
Right.
I mean, it was nice to be traveling around In the Feast of Goblins adventure, you end up in 4 different domains. So, I mean, there's a lot of travel. That's good, I guess.
Yeah, I always we mentioned that last episode where it's like that's always good to engage in like the shifting differences between domain to domain that travel helps engage in. But
This one's
again,
weak.
this like spot doesn't offer much.
Yeah,
Sadly,
except for Great Asylum.
right, which is good.
Yeah.
All right. So next episode, we're going to continue talking about Ravenloft, but I don't think we've settled on exactly where we're going to be talking about yet, have we?
No, we haven't.
We will do that and get back to our faithful listeners, or yes, we will get back to you and let you all know. But we will continue talking about Ravenloft. I have enjoyed these conversations. I cannot wait to pull Dominia into my games at some point. Goodbye, everybody.
That's as good as ending as any. Goodbye.
Goodbye.